Welcome to The Explainer. In this one, we're going to break down the structure of the modern intellectual case for Christianity. We're going to look at how the arguments are actually built, from the very origin of the universe all the way down to a single, pivotal historical event.
And this quote from Tim Keller just gets right to the heart of it, doesn't it? The whole argument is that everything, absolutely everything, hangs on one single historical question. Did Jesus rise from the dead? If that's true, well, then the rest kind of falls into place. So the real question is, how does the modern case for this get built?
Okay, so first things first, we've got to understand the strategy here. The modern argument for Christianity isn't usually presented as a single knockout punch. Instead, it's all about building a case piece by piece.
It's what's known as a cumulative case. The idea is pretty simple. Any one piece of evidence on its own can probably be debated. But the goal is to show how multiple, independent lines of evidence, we're talking philosophy, science, history, all start pointing toward the very same conclusion. You can almost picture it like a funnel, starting really broad and then narrowing down to a very, very specific point.
And that funnel often starts with the biggest question you can possibly ask, the origin of the universe itself.
A core philosophical argument for a creator is this simple three-step logic puzzle. It's called the Kalam argument. Now look, that conclusion is logically perfect if you accept the first two statements. So you can see that the entire debate really boils down to that second premise. Did the universe actually have a beginning?
So how do you even argue that the universe must have a beginning? Well, philosophers love to use these thought experiments to show the weird paradoxes of an infinite past. For example, if the past was truly infinite, you could never actually reach today. It'd be like trying to count down from infinity just to get to zero. It's impossible. These kinds of logical puzzles are used to argue that a real world, actual infinite, can't exist, which means the timeline of our universe has to be finite.
But wait a minute. What if the universe just came from nothing? Well, this is where a super important distinction is made. The nothing of philosophy, we're talking absolute non-existence, the complete absence of anything, is totally different from the nothing of physics. For a physicist, nothing is a quantum vacuum, which is actually a sea of fluctuating energy. The argument then is that coming from a quantum vacuum isn't really coming from nothing at all.
And this brings us right to the main scientific counter-argument. See, at the quantum level, the rules of our everyday world just seem to break down. Particles can pop into existence seemingly without any direct cause. And that's a direct challenge to that very first premise we saw. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. And it suggests that the rules that govern the universe's origin might be way, way stranger than we can even imagine.
So let's shift gears a bit. We're moving from a first cause to an intelligent one. This is the classic argument from design, and it's often based on the incredible fine-tuning of the universe's constants that make life like ours even possible.
Now, the most famous objection to the design argument is a really simple but incredibly powerful question. If something complex requires a designer, then doesn't a designer, who must be incredibly complex, also need a designer? You see the problem? It creates this potential endless loop. And this objection really splits into two powerful questions. First, what about the complexity of the designer itself? And second, what about the complexity of the designer's plan or ideas? Both of these questions are tough because they challenge the argument by turning its own logic, that complexity needs an explanation, right back on the proposed solution. And this right here is where that funnel we talked about gets super narrow. The case moves from a general, abstract creator to the single most important, specific claim in all of Christianity, the resurrection of Jesus. Now, proponents argue that this shouldn't just be treated as a matter of faith, but as a genuine historical question. So they use a standard historical method called inference to the best explanation. You just gather up all the agreed-upon data, and you see which hypothesis, which story, best explains all of it without leaving any major pieces out.
So the starting point for this historical case is something known as the minimal facts. And this is the key. These are a set of data points that are accepted by a really broad consensus of scholars, and that includes non-Christian and even skeptical historians. The idea is any theory you come up with, whether it's natural or supernatural, has to be able to explain all of this evidence.
So what's a leading naturalistic explanation for the disciples' belief? It's that they were so overcome with grief and trauma that they experienced powerful, vivid hallucinations of a risen Jesus.
But when you actually look at the data on bereavement experiences, it presents a pretty big challenge to that theory.
Well, it's true that almost half of grieving people report feeling a presence, which is kind of vague. Specific visual or auditory hallucinations, they're actually significantly rarer.
And this just brilliantly illustrates the statistical problem. A hallucination is a private, subjective event happening inside one person's mind. The calculated probability of a whole group of people having the exact same, complex, multisensory hallucination at the exact same time, well, it's an infinitesimally small number. We're talking 1 in 10 to the power of 33.
Okay, finally, let's set aside the supernatural for a second. How do we explain the sociological explosion of this tiny, obscure movement into a world-changing religion?
Well, historians point to a really surprising demographic advantage. See, because early Christians forbade infanticide, which was common in the Roman world and often targeted female infants, their communities had a much higher ratio of women. This led to higher birth rates internally, and it also attracted male converts who were looking for wives in a Roman world that actually had a surplus of men.
And this difference in values had incredible life-or-death consequences. During the devastating plagues that ripped through the empire, the typical pagan response was to flee, to get away from the sick. But Christians, because they believed in an afterlife, they stayed behind to care for the sick, not just their own, but their pagan neighbors too. And this counterintuitive nursing led to vastly higher survival rates inside Christian communities. I mean, this model of community care was so effective and so attractive that even the pagan Roman Emperor Julian complained about it in a letter. He said that his own priests just couldn't compete with the charity of these Galileans. So, we're left with this final question. As you can see, the modern case for Christianity isn't just one single argument. It's a convergence of things. An abstract philosophical case for a beginning, a very specific historical claim about an empty tomb, and a unique social structure that gave it a massive survival advantage. The ultimate question, then, is whether one of these is the real key, or if the best explanation can only be found in their unique intersection.